October nights in North Carolina carry the weight of autumn's last breath when highways stretch like dark ribbons through sleeping towns. On Interstate 77, where nothing ever happens, Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin made his final radio call. 10 minutes later, silence. 16 years later, that silence finally broke. The case that haunted Jonesville began with flashing lights on an empty roadside and ended in a Las Vegas courtroom. Between those moments lay a chasm of unanswered questions. A family frozen in grief, and a community that learned to live with fear. Some crimes fade into memory. Others burrow deeper with time, becoming part of a place's DNA. When the breakthrough came in 2012, it arrived like an earthquake, sudden, violent, reshaping everything. 3 names emerged from the shadows: Scott Vincent Sika, Anthony Lamont DeHart, Quincy Allen Lee. A conspiracy 16 years in the making, unraveled by persistence and technology that didn't exist when the trigger was pulled. This is the story of time's strange mathematics. How truth can hibernate for decades, how justice can arrive wearing the face of strangers, and how a single night can define generations. The echoes of that October evening never truly faded, they simply waited. Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. Cool air drifted across Interstate 77 as Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin guided his patrol car along the northbound shoulder. October 5, 1996, 10:45 p.m. The radio crackled with routine chatter. A drunk driver in Elkin, a domestic dispute in Dobson, nothing that required his attention. Martin adjusted his rearview mirror and scanned the sparse traffic. At 35, he had developed the quiet confidence that came with 7 years of rural policing. Jonesville wasn't Charlotte or Raleigh. Crime here meant stolen lawnmowers and teenage pranks. Real violence was rare enough to make headlines. A set of headlights approached from behind, traveling fast. Martin checked his speedometer and eased onto the shoulder, expecting the vehicle to pass. Instead, it slowed. The headlights grew larger in his mirror. Martin reached for his radio. Unit 47 to dispatch. Initiating traffic stop, northbound, I-77, mile marker, 82. Copy, Unit 47. Time logged at 10:47. The vehicle pulled over behind him. Martin activated his emergency lights and stepped into the cool night air. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness as he approached the car. The license plate was obscured by mud. Through the rear window, he could see multiple occupants. Evening, Martin called out, keeping his voice steady and professional. License and registration, please. The driver's window remained closed. Martin stepped closer, his hand instinctively moving toward his service weapon. Something felt wrong. The air seemed too still, too quiet. From inside the car came muffled voices, urgent whispers. Martin's training kicked in. He took a step back and reached for his radio. Unit 47 to Officer Randy Campbell's patrol car rounded the curve at 10:55 p.m., his headlights sweeping across a scene that would haunt him for decades. Martin's cruiser sat empty on the shoulder, emergency lights still flashing. The driver's door hung open like a broken wing. Campbell's stomach dropped. He grabbed his radio with trembling fingers. Dispatch, Unit 23. I've got Unit 47's vehicle abandoned on I-77. No sign of Martin. Unit 23, please clarify. Campbell stepped out of his car, drawing his weapon. His flashlight beam danced across the asphalt until it found what he dreaded most. Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin lay motionless beside his patrol car, his uniform dark with blood. Officer down! Officer down! Campbell's voice cracked over the radio. I need EMS and backup immediately. Mile marker, 82, northbound I-77. Campbell dropped to his knees beside Martin's body. Multiple gunshot wounds to the chest. No pulse. His service weapon remained holstered, unfired. Whatever happened here, Martin never had a chance to defend himself. The radio exploded with chatter. As units from 3 counties raced toward the scene, Campbell stood guard over his fallen colleague, scanning the darkness for any sign of the killer. The highway stretched empty in both directions. Whoever did this was long gone. Crime scene tape fluttered in the autumn breeze as the first wave of investigators arrived. Shell casings glinted under portable floodlights. Tire impressions were photographed and cast. Every blade of grass was examined for evidence. But the most important evidence, the killers themselves, had vanished into the North Carolina night. The Jonesville Police Department had never seen anything like it. By midnight, the small station buzzed with activity, as officers, detectives, and state agents transformed the quiet building into a command center. Maps covered every available wall surface. Phone lines rang constantly. The coffee pot never emptied. Chief Robert Hayes stood before a hastily assembled task force, his face gray with exhaustion and grief. Gregory Martin was one of our finest. We will not rest until his killers are brought to justice. Detective Lisa Chen from the State Bureau of Investigation spread crime scene photos across the conference table. The images told a brutal story. Multiple gunshot wounds from a semi-automatic weapon. Victim never drew his service weapon. This was an execution. Any witnesses? Asked FBI Special Agent Tom Rodriguez. None so far. Highway was nearly empty at that hour. Chen pointed to tire impression photos. We've got decent casts from the suspect vehicle. Appears to be a mid-size sedan, possibly stolen. A bolo alert went out across the region. Unknown suspects in a dark sedan, armed and extremely dangerous. Highway patrol units positioned themselves at every major intersection. The manhunt was underway. In the corner of the room, the officer named David Pierce studied a highway map, marking every exit within 50 miles of the crime scene. Pierce had worked alongside Martin for 2 years. The killing felt personal. They could be anywhere by now. Pierce muttered to himself, sticking another pushpin into the map. But they can't run forever. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as the investigation entered its first critical hours. Outside, Jonesville slept uneasily, knowing a killer walked among them. Dawn broke gray and cold over Jonesville on October 6th. Flags hung at half-mast throughout the small town as word of Martin's murder spread. The local radio station interrupted regular programming with updates. By 7 a.m., satellite trucks from Charlotte and Raleigh news stations lined Main Street. Chief Hayes stood before a crowd of reporters, his voice steady despite the circumstances. At approximately 10:47 p.m. last night, Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin was shot and killed during a traffic stop on Interstate 77. We are working with state and federal authorities to apprehend those responsible. Questions came rapid fire. Any suspects? Was this random? Is the community safe? Hayes deflected most inquiries. The investigation was too fresh, too fragile for public consumption. But privately, he worried. Martin's killing had the hallmarks of something more than a random traffic stop gone wrong. The efficiency of the attack, the complete absence of evidence, it felt professional. At the medical examiner's office in Winston-Salem, Dr. Patricia Yates began the autopsy that would provide crucial details. 5 gunshot wounds to the chest and abdomen. Close range. The killer had stood no more than 3 feet away when he fired. The ballistics analysis revealed fragments from a 9mm semi-automatic handgun. No serial numbers. No distinctive markings. The weapon was likely a street gun, untraceable through normal channels. Back in Jonesville, grief counselors arrived at the police station. Officers who had worked with Martin for years struggled to process the loss. He had been more than a colleague. He was a mentor, a friend, a constant presence in their small law enforcement family. His widow, Sandra, watched the news coverage from her living room, surrounded by relatives. The cameras and reporters felt invasive, vulgar. Her husband was dead, and already his death was becoming a media spectacle. The FBI's Charlotte field office became the nerve center for the expanding investigation. Special Agent Rodriguez coordinated with multiple agencies as evidence flowed in from across the region. Highway surveillance cameras, gas station security footage, cell phone tower records. Every digital footprint was analyzed. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A truck stop security camera near the Jonesville exit had captured a dark sedan speeding past at 11:03 p.m., just 16 minutes after Martin's last radio transmission. The timestamp placed it perfectly within the killer's escape window. Detective Chen enhanced the grainy footage, frame by frame. The image was frustratingly unclear, shadows and pixelated light that revealed little. But it was something. Proof that the killers had traveled north after the shooting, possibly heading toward Virginia. Run it through everything we've got, Rodriguez ordered. DMV databases, stolen vehicle reports, NCIC records. I don't care if it takes a week. Meanwhile, teams of investigators spread across 3 states, following the thin digital trail. Credit card records were subpoenaed, phone logs were analyzed. Every gas station and convenience store along I-77 was canvassed for additional surveillance footage. The investigation was becoming a massive undertaking, consuming resources from multiple agencies. But for the law enforcement community, Martin's murder represented something deeper than a single crime. It was an attack on the badge itself, a violation of the social contract that kept communities safe. In evidence room, B7, a banker's box marked Martin Gregory, case #96 to 1047, began to fill with witness statements, crime scene photos, and forensic reports. Each item represented another dead end, another frustrating lack of progress. The killer's trail was growing cold with each passing hour. October stretched into November as investigators conducted hundreds of interviews across 3 states. Truckers who had traveled I-77 that night, gas station attendants who might have seen the suspect vehicle, motel clerks who registered suspicious guests. The conversations followed a depressing pattern. Did you see anything unusual? No. Anyone acting suspicious? No. Any vehicles that caught your attention? No. Detective Pierce drove the I-77 corridor repeatedly, stopping at every business, every residence, every possible witness location, his notebook filled with names and contact information, but few useful details emerged. At the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico, profilers studied the crime scene photos and witness statements. Their preliminary assessment was troubling. The killing appeared planned and deliberate. This wasn't a random traffic stop gone wrong. Someone had targeted Martin specifically. But why? Martin had no known enemies. His cases involved minor drug arrests and traffic violations. Nothing that would motivate murder. The randomness of it made the crime even more terrifying for his fellow officers. In Jonesville, the community rallied around Martin's family. A trust fund was established for his children's education. Local businesses donated services for the funeral. Hundreds of people attended a candlelight vigil in the town square. Sandra Martin stood before the crowd, her voice breaking as she spoke. Greg died protecting this community. He believed in justice, in doing what was right. I pray that whoever did this will be caught and face justice themselves. As winter approached, the investigation began to slow. Leads dried up. Witnesses had nothing new to offer. The case that began with such urgency was settling into the grinding routine of long-term detective work. By 1997, the Martin case file had grown thick with dead-end investigations and cleared suspects. Detective Pierce, now the lead investigator, maintained regular contact with informants across the region. Every drug arrest, every weapons charge brought the same question: what do you know about the Martin killing? Most knew nothing, but occasionally, a name would surface. Scott Vincent Sika, a 23-year-old with connections to criminal circles throughout the Carolinas. Sika had been questioned early in the investigation but provided an alibi that checked out. Still, his name kept appearing in street-level intelligence reports. He's violent, one informant told Pierce during a late-night meeting at a truck stop near Statesville. Been involved in stuff you don't want to know about. But nobody talks about him. People are scared. Pierce ran Sika's name through every database available. Minor arrests for assault and drug possession, no major convictions, no apparent motive for killing a police officer, but something about him felt wrong, the kind of intuitive suspicion that veteran investigators learned to trust. The polygraph examination was inconclusive. Sika's story remained consistent across multiple interviews. He had been in Charlotte the night of the murder, attending a party with several witnesses. The alibi held. Meanwhile, other leads were pursued and abandoned. A stolen car recovered in Virginia. A shooting in Tennessee that shared similar characteristics. A witness who claimed to have seen the murder but couldn't provide details that matched the physical evidence. The case was becoming a professional obsession for Pierce. Martin's photo remained taped to his computer monitor, a daily reminder of justice deferred. Late at night, alone in the squad room, Pierce would spread the files across his desk and search for connections he might have missed. The years passed with cruel efficiency. 1998, 1999, 2000. Each anniversary brought renewed media attention and fresh promises from law enforcement officials. We will never give up, Chief Hayes told reporters. This case remains a priority, but privately, resources were being shifted to newer cases. The Martin file moved from active investigation to cold case status. The banker's box was transferred to long-term storage, joining hundreds of other unsolved cases in the basement archives. Detective Pierce retired in 2003, carrying the weight of the unsolved case into civilian life. His replacement, Detective Maria Santos, inherited the file with a promise to review it annually. The reviews became routine, perfunctory. No new evidence, no new leads, no reason for hope. In Jonesville, Martin's memory was preserved through annual memorial services and a scholarship fund in his name. His children grew up carrying their father's legacy. The youngest, Tommy, often spoke of becoming a police officer himself. Sandra Martin remarried but kept her first husband's name, maintaining the connection to the man whose death had defined her family's history. The police station underwent renovations in 2005, but Martin's photo remained prominently displayed in the main hallway. New officers learned his story during orientation. His death became part of the department's institutional memory, a reminder of the dangers inherent in law enforcement. Technology advanced. DNA analysis became more sophisticated. Database searches became more comprehensive. Cold case units were established in police departments across North Carolina. But the Martin case remained stubbornly unsolved, its evidence as inconclusive in 2010 as it had been in 1996. The killer or killers seemed to have vanished completely, leaving behind only questions and grief. January 2012 brought an unexpected development. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation announced the formation of a dedicated cold case task force funded by federal grants and equipped with the latest forensic technology. Detective Santos received a call that would change everything. "We're reopening the Martin case," announced Special Agent Jennifer Walsh, the task force commander. "New DNA analysis techniques, enhanced database searches, updated witness interview protocols. We're going to take a fresh look at everything." The evidence was transported from storage to the SBI's state-of-the-art laboratory in Raleigh. Crime scene photos were digitally enhanced. Witness statements were converted to searchable databases. Every piece of physical evidence was re-examined using technology that hadn't existed in 1996. The team assembled around a conference table in a windowless room lined with whiteboards and computer monitors. Santos joined investigators from the SBI, FBI, and Jonesville PD. For the first time in years, the Martin case had dedicated full-time attention. "We're going to assume nothing," Walsh explained to the team. "Every alibi gets rechecked. Every witness gets re-interviewed. Every piece of evidence gets reanalyzed. We have tools now that were science fiction in 1996. The name Scott Vincent Sika surfaced again during the case review. His file was thicker now: additional arrests, parole violations, suspected involvement in several unsolved crimes. He had moved to Las Vegas in 2003, apparently starting fresh in the desert. "He's still our best suspect," Santos told the team. "But we need more than suspicion. We need evidence that will hold up in court." The investigation was beginning again, 16 years after it started. Spring 2012 brought a renewed sense of purpose to the investigation. Team members fanned out across multiple states, tracking down witnesses who had been interviewed in 1996. Many had moved, changed names, or simply disappeared. But patient detective work gradually located most of them. The interviews revealed an interesting pattern. Several of Sika's former associates had hinted at his involvement in the Martin killing, but none had been willing to make formal statements. Fear, loyalty, and street credibility had kept them silent for 16 years. Detective Amy Richardson, a specialist in witness interviews, made contact with Patricia Jones, a former girlfriend of one of Sika's associates. Jones had been questioned briefly in 1997 but claimed to know nothing. Now, living in Florida with children of her own, her perspective had changed. "I was scared back then," Jones told Richardson during a video conference call. "Scott was dangerous. People who crossed him had a way of disappearing. But my kids are older now, and I think about that police officer's family. They deserve to know the truth." Jones provided new details about the night of October 5, 1996. She had seen Sika and two other men, Anthony Lamont Dehart and Quincy Allen Lee, preparing for what they called a job near Charlotte. They had returned hours later, agitated and talking about heat from the police. Scott said they had to lay low for a while, Jones recalled. He was paranoid for months afterward, constantly checking the news for updates about the investigation. The testimony was significant but not conclusive. Richardson needed corroboration, additional witnesses who could verify Jones's account. The hunt for accomplices had begun. The SBI Laboratories Ballistics Section received new attention in summer 2012 as enhanced analysis techniques were applied to evidence from the Martin case. The shell casings recovered from the crime scene were subjected to microscopic examination using equipment that hadn't existed in 1996. Forensic specialist Dr. Robert Kim made the breakthrough. "We've got distinctive firing pin impressions on 3 of the casings," he announced to the task force. "The markings are unique enough to identify the specific weapon used." The ballistic signature was entered into the National Integrated Ballistic Information Network, a database that tracked firearms evidence from crimes across the country. Within hours, a match appeared. The same weapon had been used in an armed robbery in Charlotte 6 months before Martin's murder. The robbery case file revealed additional names and connections. Anthony Lamont Dehart had been a suspect in that case, but was never charged due to insufficient evidence. Now, the ballistic connection linked him directly to the weapon that killed Martin. "We need to bring Dehart in for questioning," Walsh decided. "He's the key to unlocking this conspiracy." Dehart was located in South Carolina, living under his real name, and working construction jobs. When agents arrived at his trailer home, he seemed almost relieved. The secret he had carried for 16 years was becoming too heavy to bear. "I've been waiting for you to show up," Dehart told the agents as he was placed under arrest. "I knew this day would come eventually." The ballistic evidence had provided the missing link that connected suspects to the murder weapon. After 16 years, the case was finally moving forward. September 2012 brought the interview that would break the case open. Anthony Lamont Dehart sat across from Detectives Richardson and Santos in a sterile interrogation room, his hands folded on the metal table. 16 years of carrying guilt had aged him prematurely. "I didn't pull the trigger," Dehart began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't live with it anymore." The confession came slowly, painfully. DeHart described how Sika had planned the attack on Martin as retaliation for increased police pressure on drug operations in the region. Martin wasn't randomly selected, he had been specifically targeted because of his reputation for aggressive narcotics investigations. Scott said we needed to send a message, DeHart continued. Show the cops they weren't safe. I thought it was just talk at first, but then he got serious about it. The plan had been simple but effective. Sika would drive with DeHart and Lee providing support. They would stage a routine traffic stop, then execute Martin before he could radio for help. The timeline matched perfectly with the evidence from 1996. Lee was driving. I was in the passenger seat. Scott was in the back, DeHart explained. When Martin approached the car, Scott got out and shot him 5 times. The officer never had a chance. Richardson maintained her composure, despite the horrific details. What happened to the weapon? Scott disposed of it afterward, threw it in a lake somewhere near the Virginia border, said it would never be found. The confession provided crucial corroboration for Patricia Jones's testimony and tied together 16 years of circumstantial evidence. The case that had seemed impossible to solve was finally yielding its secrets. October 2012, exactly 16 years after Martin's murder, brought the arrest that Jonesville had waited for. U.S. Marshals coordinated with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police to locate Scott Vincent Sika at his apartment near the Strip. Sika had built a new life in Nevada, working in casino security and living quietly under his real name. He had never expected the case to follow him across the country. When agents knocked on his door at 6 a.m., he offered no resistance. Scott Vincent Sika, you're under arrest for the murder of Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin, announced Deputy Marshal James Foster as handcuffs clicked into place. The arrest made immediate national news. Cold case breakthrough. North Carolina police officers killer captured after 16 years. Sandra Martin, now Sandra Williams, received the call from Detective Santos while at work. They got him, Santos said simply. After all these years, they finally got him. Sandra sat in her car in the parking lot and cried for the first time since the funeral. The tears came from a place deeper than relief. They carried 16 years of anger, frustration, and hope deferred. Justice was finally possible. In Jonesville, the police department erupted in celebration. Officers who had never met Martin felt connected to his memory through the investigation that had consumed so many resources for so long. Chief Hayes, now nearing retirement, called a press conference. This arrest represents the dedication and persistence of law enforcement at every level, Hayes announced. Gregory Martin can finally rest in peace. The extradition process began immediately. Sika would return to North Carolina to face charges of first-degree murder. The Yadkin County Courthouse had never seen media attention like this. Satellite trucks lined the street as Scott Vincent Sika made his first appearance before Judge Patricia Moore. 16 years after the crime, the wheels of justice were finally turning. Sika, now 39 years old, looked older than his years. Prison orange replaced the casino security uniform. Shackles replaced the freedom he had enjoyed for 16 years. When asked to enter a plea, his voice was barely audible. Not guilty. District Attorney Rebecca Walsh, no relation to the SBI agent, outlined the prosecution's case for the media. We have witness testimony, forensic evidence, and a confession from one of the accomplices. The evidence against Mr. Sika is overwhelming. Defense attorney Michael Roberts cautioned against premature judgment. My client maintains his innocence. We will vigorously contest these charges in court. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officers from across the region. Martin's photograph was displayed prominently at the prosecutor's table, a reminder of why everyone was there. Sandra Williams sat in the front row, flanked by her children and extended family. Tommy Martin, now 27 years old, had indeed followed his father's path into law enforcement. He wore his Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department uniform to the hearing, a visible symbol of his father's continuing legacy. Outside the courthouse, Chief Hayes addressed the gathered media. This day has been 16 years in coming. While nothing can bring Gregory back, we hope this prosecution will provide some measure of closure for his family and our community. The legal proceedings would take months to unfold, but the first crucial step had been taken. As 2013 progressed, the investigation expanded to capture Sika's accomplices. Anthony Lamont DeHart's cooperation had provided crucial testimony, but prosecutors needed Quincy Allen Lee to complete the picture. Lee had proven more elusive than DeHart, moving frequently and using aliases to avoid detection. Finally, a tip from a parole officer in Virginia led investigators to a small town near the North Carolina border. Lee was working at a gas station, living paycheck to paycheck under an assumed name. I wondered when you'd find me, Lee told arresting officers. Like DeHart, he seemed relieved that the secret was finally out. Lee's interview revealed additional details about the conspiracy. The three men had met weeks before the murder to plan the attack. Sika had conducted surveillance on Martin's patrol patterns, identifying the stretch of I-77 where the traffic stop would occur. Scott studied that cop like he was hunting an animal, Lee told investigators. He knew Martin's schedule, his habits, everything. This wasn't random. The premeditation evidence strengthened the prosecution's case significantly. This wasn't a traffic stop gone wrong, it was a calculated assassination of a police officer. Travel records and cell phone data corroborated Lee's timeline. Credit card receipts placed all three men in the Jonesville area on October 5, 1996. Hotel records showed they had checked into a motel near Statesville the night before the murder. Detective Santos marveled at how thoroughly the case was coming together. 16 years ago, we had almost nothing. Now we have confessions, forensic evidence, and a complete timeline. It's like the pieces finally decided to fit. The courtroom proceedings of 2014 would bring resolution to one of North Carolina's most notorious cold cases. Scott Vincent Sika, facing overwhelming evidence and the prospect of multiple life sentences, began plea negotiations with prosecutors. The evidence against your client is substantial, District Attorney Walsh informed Defense Attorney Roberts during a closed-door meeting. 2. Confessed accomplices. Forensic evidence. Witness testimony. I'd recommend considering a plea agreement. The prosecution's case was indeed formidable. DeHart and Lee had both agreed to testify against Sika in exchange for reduced sentences. The ballistic evidence tied all three men to the murder weapon. Travel records and witness statements corroborated the conspiracy timeline. Sika's defense options were limited. Roberts knew that a jury trial would likely result in conviction and a possible death sentence. The plea negotiations focused on avoiding capital punishment rather than proving innocence. On a gray February morning, Sika appeared before Judge Moore to formally change his plea. The courtroom was packed with law enforcement officers, media representatives, and Martin's family members. Mr. Sika, how do you plead to the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Sergeant Gregory Keith Martin? Judge Moore asked. Sika stood slowly, his voice steady but quiet. Guilty, Your Honor. The words echoed through the silent courtroom. After 16 years of mystery, the case that had haunted Jonesville was finally resolved. Sandra Williams closed her eyes and felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had carried since 1996. Justice was served, but healing would take much longer. The sentencing hearing for Sika's accomplices brought additional closure to the case. Anthony Lamont DeHart, whose cooperation had been crucial to solving the murder, received a sentence of 15 years for second-degree murder and conspiracy charges. Quincy Allen Lee, who had served primarily as the getaway driver, was sentenced to 12 years on similar charges. Both men would serve their time in different facilities, separated from each other and from Sika. Sika himself received life in prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Moore's words during sentencing reflected the community's long wait for justice. This crime shocked the conscience of law-abiding citizens and represented a direct attack on the rule of law itself. The disparate sentences reflected each man's role in the conspiracy and level of cooperation. And with investigators, Sika, as the triggerman and mastermind, bore the greatest responsibility. DeHart and Lee, despite their involvement, had ultimately helped solve the case through their testimony. Local media covered the sentencings extensively, but the national attention had moved on to other stories. For Jonesville, however, the resolution represented something profound, proof that persistence and dedication could eventually overcome even the most challenging obstacles. Detective Santos, who had inherited the case from Pierce years earlier, reflected on the long journey to justice. There were times when I thought this case would never be solved. But the evidence was there, waiting for the right technology and the right witnesses to come forward. The courthouse steps emptied as the last hearing concluded. The legal proceedings were complete, but the impact would continue for generations. The victim impact statements in late 2014 provided the most emotional moments of the entire legal process. Sandra Williams took the witness stand first, her voice steady despite years of suppressed grief. Gregory was more than a police officer, she told the packed courtroom. He was a husband, a father, a man who believed deeply in protecting others. Scott Sika didn't just kill my husband, he stole our children's father, our community's protector, and our family's future. Tommy Martin followed his stepmother to the witness stand. The young police officer spoke directly to Sika, who sat at the defense table, staring at his hands. You took my father when I was 11 years old, Tommy said, his voice growing stronger with each word. I grew up angry, confused, wondering why someone would kill a good man who never hurt anyone. but I also grew up determined to honor his memory by wearing this badge myself. Martin's daughter, now 25 and a schoolteacher, described the milestones her father had missed: graduations, weddings, the birth of grandchildren he would never meet. "Every important moment in our lives has been shadowed by his absence," she said. The impact statements revealed the true cost of the crime, not just the loss of life, but the ripple effects that had touched dozens of people over 16 years. Friends, colleagues, and community members all carried pieces of the grief. Judge Moore listened intently to each statement, occasionally glancing at Sika to gauge his reaction. The defendant showed little emotion, staring straight ahead as the full weight of his actions was laid bare. The press conference following the final sentencing drew law enforcement officials from across North Carolina. Chief Hayes, now preparing for retirement, stood beside representatives from the SBI, FBI, and multiple police departments that had contributed to the investigation. "This case represents everything that is best about law enforcement," Hayes announced to the assembled media. "The dedication, persistence, and cooperation between agencies that made this resolution possible." Special Agent Walsh from the SBI emphasized the role of modern forensic technology in solving the case. The same evidence that existed in 1996 told a much clearer story when examined with 2014 techniques. Science and persistence combined to achieve justice. FBI Special Agent Rodriguez praised the cold case task force approach. "This investigation demonstrates the value of dedicating resources to unsolved cases. Justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied." The press conference also highlighted broader implications for cold case investigations. The Martin case had become a template for other agencies dealing with long unsolved murders. The techniques used: enhanced forensic analysis, systematic witness re-interviews, and multi-agency cooperation were being adopted across the country. Detective Santos answered questions about the investigation timeline. "We never gave up hope, but there were certainly moments when the case seemed impossible to solve. The breakthrough came when we combined new technology with old-fashioned detective work. The media attention would fade within days, but the impact of the case would continue to influence law enforcement practices for years to come." Washington, D.C., provided the setting for the final chapter of Gregory Martin's story. On a warm spring day in 2015, his name was officially added to the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial during the annual Candlelight Vigil. Sandra Williams and her children traveled to the nation's capital for the ceremony. They joined thousands of other law enforcement families honoring officers who had died in the line of duty. The memorial wall, inscribed with more than 20,000 names, represented the ultimate sacrifice made by men and women in uniform. Gregory Keith Martin was etched into panel 8W, line 15, alongside other officers who had died in 1996. The inscription was simple but powerful, a permanent reminder of his service and sacrifice. Tommy Martin, now a sergeant with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, participated in the ceremony wearing his dress uniform. He had requested the assignment to the memorial detail, wanting to personally honor his father's memory on the national stage. During the candlelight vigil that evening, thousands of small flames flickered against the dark granite walls. Each candle represented a life lost, a family forever changed, a community that had mourned and endured. The ceremony attracted law enforcement officers from across the country, including several who had worked on the Martin investigation. Detective Pierce, now retired, made the trip from North Carolina to pay his respects to the case that had defined much of his career. As the candles burned late into the night, Martin's name glowed softly on the memorial wall, no longer representing an unsolved mystery, but honoring a life of service finally rewarded with justice. The annual memorial service in Jonesville became a tradition that outlasted the headlines and media attention. Each October 5th, the community gathered in the town square to remember Gregory Martin and reflect on the long journey to justice. The 2015 service was different from previous years. For the first time since 1996, the gathering felt like a celebration rather than a plea for help. Chief Hayes, in his final public appearance before retirement, addressed the crowd of several hundred residents. "Gregory Martin's name will live on not just as a victim, but as a symbol of justice persevering," Hayes said, his voice carrying across the quiet square. "This community never gave up hope, and that hope was finally rewarded." The program listed the names of all three convicted killers: Scott Vincent Sika, Anthony Lamont D. Hart, Quincy Allen Lee, along with their sentences. For many residents, seeing those names in print provided a sense of finality that had been missing for 19 years. Sandra Williams spoke briefly, thanking the community for their support through the long ordeal. Jonesville never forgot Gregory, and neither did the investigators who worked tirelessly to solve his case. "We can finally say that justice has been served." The ceremony concluded with the playing of taps by a member of the high school marching band. As the haunting notes echoed across the square, many in attendance reflected on how the community had been changed by both the crime and its resolution. Children who had been born after the murder learned Martin's story in school. His death had become part of the town's collective memory, a reminder that evil could touch even the safest places, but that good people would always fight back. Retrospective interviews with key investigators revealed the emotional toll of working the case for nearly 2 decades. Detective Pierce, now fully retired, spoke candidly about the personal investment that made the Martin case different from other investigations. "You carry these cases with you," Pierce explained during a filmed interview for a local documentary. "Gregory's photo was on my desk for 7 years. I saw his face every day when I came to work, every night when I left. You don't just work a case like that, you live with it." Special Agent Walsh from the SBI described the moment when the breakthrough evidence finally emerged. After 16 years of dead ends, when that ballistics match came back, it was like a dam breaking. Suddenly, everything started falling into place. Detective Santos, who had inherited the case from Pierce, emphasized the importance of never giving up. Cold cases aren't really cold, they're just waiting for the right combination of technology, witnesses, and persistence. "We knew somebody out there had the answers. We just had to keep looking." The interviews revealed how personal the case had become for everyone involved. FBI agent Rodriguez had kept Martin's case file on his desk throughout his career, referring to it as unfinished business. Prosecutor Walsh described the conviction as one of the most satisfying moments of her legal career. "It's not often that you get to deliver justice to a family that has waited nearly 20 years, Walsh said. "That courtroom was full of people who had never stopped believing this day would come." The final chapter of the Martin case wrote itself across multiple settings: courtroom archives, police station memorials, and family gatherings where his memory lived on. In the evidence room, boxes marked "Case Closed" replaced the active investigation labels that had defined the case for so long. The impact extended beyond Jonesville. North Carolina established additional cold case task forces based on the Martin investigation model. Other states began re-examining unsolved officer murders, using the same combination of enhanced forensics and systematic witness re-interviews. Scott Vincent Sika began serving his life sentence at Central Prison in Raleigh, where he would spend the remainder of his days. Appeals were filed and rejected. The conviction was solid, built on overwhelming evidence and multiple confessions. Anthony Lamont DeHart and Quincy Allen Lee served their sentences quietly, both expressing remorse for their roles in the conspiracy. DeHart, in particular, continued to cooperate with authorities, providing information that helped solve other cold cases throughout the region. Sandra Williams moved forward with her life, finally able to close the chapter that had defined her family for so long. The justice they had waited for didn't erase the pain, but it provided the closure necessary for true healing to begin. Tommy Martin continued his law enforcement career, eventually becoming a detective himself. He specialized in cold cases, understanding better than most the importance of never giving up on the seemingly impossible investigations. In the Jonesville Police Department, Martin's photograph remained in its place of honor, but the inscription below it changed. Where it once read, "In memory of our fallen officer," it now read, "Justice served October 5, 1996 to February 12, 2014. The dates bracketed nearly 18 years of investigation, but they also marked the journey from tragedy to resolution. Time had not healed all wounds, but it had finally delivered the truth that allowed healing to begin. On quiet October nights, when patrol officers drive the same stretch of I-77, where Martin made his final traffic stop, they remember not just his death, but the persistence that ultimately brought his killers to justice. The highway that once represented fear and unanswered questions had become a symbol of law enforcement's commitment to never forget, never give up, and never let justice remain undone. Gregory Keith Martin's story ended not with silence, but with the voice of truth finally speaking after nearly 2 decades of waiting. In that voice, his community found peace, his family found closure, and his fellow officers found renewed faith in the principle that no case is ever truly cold as long as someone remembers.